Hello, my name is Daniel, and I'm 32 years old. A couple of years ago, something horrifying happened in my life that I want to share with you. I'll start by saying that I never believed in the supernatural or any kind of dark forces. Since childhood, I've been involved in sports, specifically combat sambo and weightlifting. I've achieved significant success in both disciplines, so strength and endurance have never been an issue for me. You'll soon understand why I'm mentioning this. At the time, I was working as an investigator. I live in a large city, which I won't name because the story isn't about it. About 200 kilometers away from our city, there's a small town called Greenfield. It's more of a settlement, really, with a population of around 10,000 people. I was sent there on a business trip. When I arrived, I was given a room in the local hotel. My task was to investigate a series of brutal murders and determine whether additional measures were needed. At the police station, I was briefed on the details. For the past month, nighttime revelers had been brutally killed. At first, it was assumed that a wild animal was responsible because the bodies were torn apart and partially eaten. However, no one could figure out what kind of animal it was. The wounds didn't match those of a wolf or a bear. It was more like a tiger. But tigers had never been seen in the local forests, and the attacks only happened at night, which was unusual for animals. After sunset, people stopped going outside and began talking about supernatural entities, vampires, werewolves, and the like. The bodies kept appearing in different parts of the town, though less frequently than before. Most of the victims were drunks or homeless people. There were no witnesses, and no one knew who or what the killer was until recently. A young couple, who thought they were safe in their car, decided to drive around the town at night. They were attacked, and the police received a call for help. I and 3 armed officers responded. When we arrived at the scene, we were stunned. The car was in the middle of the road, looking as if it had been smashed with a bat and hacked with an axe. The driver's side window was shattered, and the area around the door was covered in fresh blood. Inside the car, we found a terrified girl named Emily. She was shaking and stammering, pointing toward the forest. About 30 meters from the car, near the trees, we found the mutilated body of her boyfriend, Chris. His stomach was ripped open, his throat torn to shreds, and his limbs twisted at unnatural angles. His entire body was covered in deep gashes. One of the officers vomited at the sight. Emily was unharmed, not a scratch on her. We took her to the station and she told us what had happened. She and Chris were sitting in the car when, out of nowhere, a tall, dark figure appeared in front of them. It wore a hood, and its face was hidden, but they could see 2 huge, terrifying eyes glowing from under the hood. Chris turned on the headlights, and for a second they saw its face. Bright yellow, cat-like eyes, 2 holes instead of a nose, unnaturally pale skin, and a mouth full of sharp teeth. In an instant, it smashed the headlights and began circling the car, hitting it. Then it shattered the window, reached in with a pale, clawed hand, and grabbed Chris by the throat. Emily tried to hold him back, but the creature yanked him out of the car and dragged him toward the trees. She called the police, and we arrived within minutes. As we approached with sirens blaring, she saw the creature's silhouette retreating into the forest. We were divided in our opinions. Some believed in a monster, while others, including me, tried to find a rational explanation. We combed the crime scene for evidence and even brought in dogs, but they were useless. 2 trained German shepherds cowered and whined, trying to escape. This behavior deeply unsettled us. The killer had vanished without a trace. likely fleeing into the forest beyond the park. The forest wasn't large, but searching it seemed futile. We decided to set up an ambush. For the next couple of days, nothing happened. Police officers were stationed at various points around the town, but there were no further incidents. After the attack on the couple, people were too scared to go out, even during the day. We needed bait, and since no one else volunteered, I took on the role. We planned to lure the creature into the park. An hour before sunset, the officers took their positions, and I walked along a path leading toward the forest. As darkness fell, I felt a chill. Suddenly, about 10 meters ahead of me, the same figure Emily had described appeared out of thin air. I pulled out my gun and flashlight, aiming both at the figure. When the light hit its face, I froze. The description was accurate. Huge yellow eyes with cat-like pupils, pale skin, no nose, and a mouth full of sharp teeth. Its clawed hands hung down to its knees, and it wore tattered clothing with a hood. Before I could pull the trigger, it closed the distance in an instant, knocking the gun from my hand. I swung at it with all my strength, but it felt like hitting a tree. The creature grabbed me by the throat, lifted me off the ground, and threw me several meters away. My athletic training and weight were useless against it. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed my gun, but the creature slashed my left shoulder with its claws. I broke free and fired at it. The backup officers arrived and started shooting as well. The creature let out an unearthly roar and leaped into the forest with incredible speed. We didn't pursue it. We were in shock. We had fired at least a dozen bullets into it, but it seemed unharmed. Whatever it wasn't human or an ordinary animal. We needed heavier firepower. A curfew was imposed in the town, and patrols were increased. I didn't report the truth to my superiors. What would I say? That we couldn't catch a killer in a small town? Only the 4 officers who had been in the ambush knew the truth. We were tormented by questions. What was this creature? Where did it come from? How could we destroy it? Small caliber weapons were ineffective. We needed to aim for the head, but in the dark, it was nearly impossible. We decided to search the forest. At dawn, we set out with shotguns. We left our vehicle at the edge of the forest and ventured deeper. It didn't take long before we came across an old abandoned hut. We approached cautiously, weapons ready. Inside, we found an old woman sitting at a table. She seemed blind and deaf, but suddenly, in a raspy voice, she said, "Boys, how good of you to come. He's just gotten hungry." She laughed horribly, and I noticed a slightly open door to a cellar in the corner. From the darkness, 2 glowing yellow eyes stared at me. I was paralyzed. One of the officers, Mark, cursed, and the old woman suddenly pulled a knife from her sleeve and stabbed him. Another officer, Jake, shot her with his shotgun, splattering her against the wall. At that moment, a blood-curdling scream came from the cellar, and the door flew off its hinges. The creature burst out and began tearing the officers apart. It moved with unnatural speed, and despite our shots, it kept killing. I was the last one standing. I grabbed a shotgun and fired at the creature's head at point-blank range. It fell but was still alive. I kept shooting until it stopped moving. I was the only survivor. Terrified that the creature might rise again, I decided to burn the hut. I ran back to the car, grabbed gasoline and a lighter, and set the hut ablaze. Watching it burn, I felt a sense of relief. The nightmare was over. In the months that followed, I was interrogated and put on trial. I was fired from the police force, but I didn't care. The worst part was that they tried to pin the deaths of the 4 officers and the old woman on me. No trace of the creature was found. Somehow it had survived. I'm still terrified that it might come after me for revenge.